At her funeral, I learned the truth about my marriage. The first lie I ever told my wife was that I was happy. I remember standing beside her casket as sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows of the church, painting the polished wood in shards of gold and blue. Everyone thought I was crying because I had lost the love of my life. But the truth was more complicated than grief. I was crying because I had just discovered that I had never truly known her, and perhaps, I had never truly known myself. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Stories like this remind us that love is rarely what it seems, and sometimes, the truth comes when it's almost too late. Her name was Maricela Vance. She had the kind of laugh that made strangers turn their heads and smile without knowing why. We met 12 years ago on a bright spring afternoon at a farmer's market. I was arguing with a vendor about the price of honey when she stepped forward, paid for my jar without a word, and handed it to me with a teasing grin. I should have seen then that she was braver than I was, more generous, more alive. I was an architect, practical, methodical, careful. Maricela was a public school art teacher who believed that color could heal people. She would drag home canvas after canvas splattered with paint and stories about children who had drawn their fears into something beautiful. I admired her passion, but I rarely understood it. I loved her, but in a quiet, contained way. She loved loudly. Our marriage, from the outside, looked steady and respectable. We bought a small 2-story house with pale yellow siding and a maple tree in the front yard. We hosted brunches. We smiled in photos. We held hands at neighborhood barbecues. But behind closed doors, there were long stretches of silence. Not angry silence, just empty silence. The distance crept in so gradually I barely noticed it. I worked late more often, convincing myself it was necessary to provide for our future. Maricela stayed up waiting for me at first, her dinner cold on the stove, but eventually she stopped. She began spending more time at school, organizing weekend art fairs, volunteering at community centers. I told myself she was simply busy. I never asked what she was feeling. I never asked if she was lonely. The morning she died was a clear, ordinary Tuesday. Sunlight poured across our kitchen table, illuminating dust particles that drifted lazily in the air. She had kissed my cheek before leaving for school, her perfume lingering behind. I remember thinking I would call her during lunch, maybe suggest dinner somewhere nice. I didn't. By noon, she was gone. A distracted driver. A red light ignored. A single, terrible moment. When the police officer knocked on my office door, I felt the world tilt. There are sounds grief makes that no one prepares you for, the hollow echo in your chest, the roaring in your ears as if the ocean has suddenly rushed in and filled your body. I drove to the hospital in a daze, sunlight flashing across my windshield in blinding streaks. By the time I arrived, there was nothing left to save. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of paperwork and condolences. Our house filled with flowers and casseroles. People I barely knew hugged me and said how devoted we were to each other. I nodded and thanked them. I played the part of the grieving husband well. The funeral itself was held on a bright Saturday morning. The sky was painfully blue, as if mocking the heaviness in my chest. The church was crowded, former students, fellow teachers, neighbors, distant relatives. I hadn't realized how many lives she had touched. I stood near the front, beside the closed casket, watching people approach one by one. They left handwritten notes and small tokens, a paintbrush, a child's drawing, a folded ribbon. I felt like an outsider at my own wife's farewell. After the service, as the crowd thinned and the midday sun warmed the church steps, a woman approached me. She was older, with silver hair pulled into a low bun and kind eyes that studied me carefully. "You must be Elias," she said softly. I nodded. "I'm Corinne Hale. Maricela talked about you often." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. There was something in her tone, something layered. She did? I asked. Corinne smiled gently. She loved you very much. Loved. Past tense. The word felt like a door slamming shut. Before I could respond, she handed me a thick envelope. She asked me to give you this. Not now. When you're alone. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, my pulse hammering. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the house was finally quiet and the sunlight slanted long across the living room floor, that I opened it. I sat at our kitchen table, the same one where she had kissed me goodbye, and pulled out a stack of letters. They were dated. Spanning nearly 4 years. My hands trembled as I unfolded the first one. Maricella's handwriting curved across the page, familiar and beautiful. She wrote about feeling unseen. About how she would watch me sketch building designs late at night and wonder if I ever noticed how her shoulders drooped from exhaustion. She wrote about missing the man who once danced with her in the kitchen. She wrote about how she had tried to tell me she was afraid we were drifting apart, but the words always seemed to dissolve when she saw how tired I looked. Each letter ended the same way, I still believe in us. Tears blurred the ink. I had never received these letters. She had never given them to me. Instead, she had given them to Corinne, her therapist. There was a final letter, undated. In it, she wrote that she had considered leaving. Not because she didn't love me, but because she felt invisible. She said she had imagined a small apartment filled with sunlight and quiet, a place where she could hear her own heartbeat again. But she had decided to stay. She wrote that she wanted to try one more time, that she believed marriage was not about perfection but persistence. She had even planned to ask me to attend counseling with her. The last lines crushed me. If something ever happens to me, I hope Elias reads this and understands that loving someone quietly is not the same as loving them fully. I hope he forgives himself. And I hope he chooses to live more bravely than we did together. The kitchen felt impossibly still. Outside, children rode bicycles down the sidewalk, their laughter floating through the open window. The world was going on, indifferent to my revelation. I had thought our marriage was stable because it wasn't loud. I had mistaken absence of conflict for presence of connection. I had been comfortable. And in my comfort, I had let her carry the weight of our love alone. The days that followed were different. The grief changed shape. It was no longer just about missing her, it was about confronting myself. I began noticing the small details she had once pointed out, the way sunlight pooled on the hardwood floor in the afternoon, the way the maple tree in our yard rustled like whispered secrets. She had tried to show me beauty, and I had been too busy measuring walls. I attended one of her art classes at the school, months after her passing, at the invitation of the principal. The room still smelled faintly of acrylic paint and chalk. Her students had created a mural in her honor, a vibrant explosion of color across one wall. In the center, they had painted her smiling, surrounded by open hands. One little boy, no older than 8, tugged at my sleeve. He told me Mrs. Vance had taught him that mistakes could turn into masterpieces if you were brave enough to keep painting. I went home and cried harder than I had at the funeral. Slowly, I began making changes, not grand gestures, but deliberate ones. I reduced my work hours. I volunteered at the community center where she used to host weekend art fairs. I started sketching again, not buildings but landscapes, messy and imperfect. I reached out to Corinne and began therapy. For the first time in my life, I spoke honestly about fear, of failure, of vulnerability, of not being enough. I realized that I had built my marriage the same way I built my structures, strong, symmetrical, practical. But love is not a blueprint. It is alive. It requires tending, listening, risk. A year after her funeral, on a bright spring morning that mirrored the day we met, I stood beneath the maple tree in our yard. Its leaves shimmered in the sunlight, vibrant and green. I held the last letter in my hands, the paper softened from rereading. I whispered an apology into the warm air, not because I believed she could hear me, but because I needed to say it. I thanked her for loving me even when I was difficult to love. I promised to honor her not with guilt, but with growth. If this story has touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your support means more than you know, and it helps stories of healing and second chances reach those who need them most. And before this story ends, I want to ask you something deeply personal. Have you told the people you love how much they matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be the reminder someone else is waiting for. I never remarried. Not because I closed my heart, but because I finally learned how to keep it open. I carry Maricela with me in everything I do, not as a source of regret, but as a quiet teacher. Her absence became the mirror that showed me who I had been and who I still had time to become. At her funeral, I learned the truth about my marriage. It was imperfect. It was strained. It was fragile. But it was also filled with chances I had almost ignored. The greatest tragedy was not that she had once considered leaving. The tragedy would have been if I had never changed at all. Now, when sunlight filters through stained glass or spills across my kitchen table, I don't look away. I let it warm my face. I let it remind me that love, like light, must be noticed to be felt. And every day, in small, deliberate ways, I choose to love more bravely than we did together.